welcome back to my channel. So today I'm going to be making a video that focuses on interview questions for teachers. So I'm going to go over some questions that I've been asked in interviews, and then I'm going to give you some answers that I use, and they've actually worked out pretty well for me. So the first question a lot of people say is the hardest. The question is, tell me about yourself. So that one can be kind of hard for you to answer if you don't know what to say. So I had a friend who was asked this question, tell me about yourself, and she said that she just got married and she was so excited, and she was just saying all these things that were happening in her personal life. But those aren't really the answers that they're looking for when they ask you that. So usually when someone asks you, tell me about yourself, they're mostly interested in your educational background. How are you prepared for this position? Why should we hire you? Are you educated enough? Do you have enough training for this position? So tell me about yourself and your educational background. What experience do you have? That's what they're looking for, experience and your education. So for me, I would say, well, my name's Amanda. I graduated from Cal State Fullerton. I got my bachelor's degree in English. I also got my minor in communications. I have a passion for communications and English alike. I really enjoy reading, and I want to be able to take my passions into the classroom to be able to teach kids. And you're going to go on into your student teaching. Where did you student teach? How long did you student teach? What was your experience like? Did you do a full day when you were student teaching? What about subbing experience? Have you been a substitute? What classes have you subbed? And what do you do when they don't leave you any sub plans? You know, you have to be able to tell them all of your experience, all of your classwork as well. I could also say, well, I took classes over the summer online and I got my credits for this, I did that. You can say all of your different education, all of your different experiences that have to do with that job. You want to keep it specifically for that job opening. Don't focus on your personal life because they don't want to know that. You can throw something in there like, I just got married this summer while I was getting classes done. You can say something like that, but you don't want to focus too much on that. They want to know about your education and your skills that relate to the specific job. All right, so number 2, it says, why do you want to be a teacher? This is where you want to make it a little personal to you and let them know that there was a teacher that made you feel like you wanted to be a teacher, or some kind of mentor that made you feel like you wanted to be a teacher, or maybe it wasn't even a teacher or mentor that made you want to do it, but you do want to make sure that you are telling them a personal experience as to why you want to do this, so that they know that you actually really want to do this, not just because, oh, well, it's a job, you know, because teachers don't really get their positions by saying, oh, I'm just doing it for the money, or I just want to do it because I don't know what else I want to do. They want to know why you actually want to do it, because in teaching, there needs to be a lot of passion there for what you do, because if the teacher doesn't care, the students aren't going to care, and they need to know that you care not only about what you're teaching, but about that specific role as a teacher as well, because you are in charge of kids. So you want to make sure that you're bringing in personal stories here. Don't get too personal, but tell them, why do you want to be a teacher? So I usually use the story of when I was younger, I used to play school all the time with my brother and sister. I would assign them homework. I was always the teacher. I didn't like being the student because I was the one that wanted to help people. Okay, you want to make sure that you're saying things like that. All right, number 3, why do you want to teach here? When they ask you, why do you want to teach here, you want to make sure that you're actually giving information that you know about the school. Even if you've never heard of this school before, you researched it, and now you can use that in your interview and use that to your advantage. That's what they're looking for. So go on the school website and you look up the school motto, you're going to look up the school mascot, you're going to look up all the different activities that maybe they have done. Usually on school websites, you can find slideshows and different links to different activities that they've done where they have photos and all these cool things. You want to say things where the school is going to feel like, all right, they actually want to work here because of what I have to offer. The next one is a very important question, and I can almost guarantee you're going to be asked this in your interview. They're going to say something like, tell me about your classroom management. Now this one can be kind of tricky because when you're a new teacher going into an interview, you think that they're asking you about behavior management. And that's kind of what they're asking, but not really. They're mostly asking about your routines. Do you have an opening activity? Do you do warm-ups or journals at the beginning of the period? What is your opening activity? Then you can also say that you have exit tickets or anything like that to show comprehension from your students. So at the beginning of the period, you can start with a warm-up that's going to be a question. Then you go into your lesson and you teach your lesson where they're working collaboratively, they're using technology, and all of these different things that you're teaching them and using are helping them reach that objective or goal for the day. In the end, you can give them exit tickets as well. So at the beginning, your warm-up will ask a question, and then at the end, that'll probably be the same question, and now you can see if they're actually learning. So they're showing that comprehension throughout each period. Another good way is to have pre-tests and post-tests, which kind of go with the warm-up and the exit ticket, only you're just changing the actual form. Is it a pre-test or a post-test? Is it a warm-up or is it an exit ticket? What did you know at the beginning? And then you learned some things. Now what do you know at the end that maybe you didn't know in the beginning? Do you have specific seating charts? Do you put students at specific desks for specific reasons? You want to tell them all these different things. You want to stress that you have a lot of structure in your classroom. They love to hear that you are structuring your day perfectly. Make sure that they know that not a minute it was wasted in your classroom. You have everything structured down to how long each specific task lasts. So for me, when I was doing my student teaching, my master teacher told me something about the 7-7-7 rule. So in the classroom, you only work on a task for 7 minutes. So after each 7 minutes, you're transitioning into something new. So there's always something changing every 7 minutes. So you're maybe reading for 7 minutes, and then you're gonna switch over and you're gonna talk about it and have a discussion for 7 minutes. After that, maybe you're gonna answer some questions for 7 minutes. If you go over that 7 minutes, kids start to lose interest. They start to get bored. They start to look at the ceiling and talk to their friends. But during that time, they're actually working. So only 7 minutes, switch. Only 7 minutes, switch. How are you handling your classroom in terms of time? Well, I practice the 7-7-7 method. Once that 7-minute mark has been hit, I don't continue. I instead transition over to something else. This next question is about behavior management. It says, what steps would you follow to deal with a student who displays consistent behavioral problems in your classroom? Now this question focuses more on discipline. One thing you can say is that you keep a steady line of communication with the parent. You can call them, you can email them, and you can even send them bulletins through their email in different type of apps. If a student is maybe talking too much in class, you can talk to that parent and see what they would suggest you do before taking it any further. You can also talk to teachers, but you want to start off with the parent so that the parent knows what's going on first. They want to see that you're actually implementing different strategies to keep that behavior from happening again. So they don't want you to send the student straight up to the office. What they want to hear is how you're actually taking those steps to make sure that that behavior completely stops. It should be a problem for the teacher before it actually gets to the administration. So first you need to handle that discipline with the student on their own. If you call a student out for their behavior in the middle of the class for everyone to hear, it's just going to turn into a joke and they're not going to take you seriously. In fact, they're going to lose respect for you because they just found out that you don't have respect for them. If someone is doing something wrong in class and you're just calling them out on it, you're embarrassing them in front of the whole classroom. Instead, you can go over to the student and ask them to stay after class so that you can talk to them. Or you can just be very subtle about it and put a post-it note on their desk that says, please stay after class. This way the student understands what to do without being embarrassed by the other students. If the behavior is actually worse than that, you can actually tell the student to just go step outside and wait for me to talk to you. If it's really that bad and they're distracting other students, you want to get that behavior out before you can actually continue with the other students. I don't think it's fair for other students to steal that opportunity of learning from others, so I like to send the students outside of my classroom and wait until I finish giving directions. Once the student is outside, I'll finish giving directions so that the other students know what to do, and then I'll go out and I'll talk to that student one-on-one. I prefer one-on-one conversations because it really builds that relationship of trust. If I'm talking to one student on their own, then chances are I'm going to get a more honest answer from that student. If I'm talking to a student in a group of 4 or 5, maybe there were 4 or 5 kids that were causing problems in class. If I send all 5 out there and talk to them all together, chances are no one's going to take me seriously because they're still with all of their friends. You need to make sure that each student is accountable for their own behavior. So if you're sending an entire group out there, that means the group is responsible. And it's not the group, it's the individual students in that group. So make sure you separate students when you're talking to them. Get to know what's actually the problem and get to the root of that problem. If the behavior continues from there, that's where you need to actually take the initiative and call the parents. See if there's anything going on at home, because there may actually be something that happened at home where that kid isn't feeling well and they're just reacting to that. Usually the parent will offer any advice on what you can do or what has worked for them as a parent. If they don't automatically offer that advice, then you can ask them for it. Don't be afraid to ask the parent on what to do. Although you're the teacher, like I said earlier, no one knows that student better than the parent. Sometimes the parent may also get upset that the student was misbehaving, so the parent may also take that initiative to discipline the student at home as well. Now, after all of that intervention, if the behavior is still continuing, that's when you're going to send the student to the counselor. Usually the counselor will be there to talk to the student and make sure they find out what's going on and how they can fix this problem. Before sending the student straight to the principal, you want to send them to the counselor to see what's wrong. Some of the students may be dealing with things that you may have no idea about, and maybe they just don't feel comfortable sharing that personal information with you, their teacher. So instead, the counselor can actually intervene and help find out what's wrong. They can actually call meetings with the parents as well. Now, the counselor can also set up meetings without you. Eventually, they may even set up a SIT meeting. So when I was student teaching, we had SIT meetings, which stood for Student Intervention Team. So sometimes a student intervention team meeting is needed. Now, I've been on 2 student intervention team meetings, and that's where the teachers are called out of their class along with the student, and every single teacher is in that meeting, as well as the parent, the student, the administration, so vice principal, principal, whoever's there, and the counselor. Sometimes there may also be a psychologist in that room as well. This is where the entire meeting focuses around that student. We can see exactly how that student is behaving in every single class. We can look through their grades individually per teacher, and we can find solutions to fix this problem. The last thing you want to do is go to the principal. Because the principals are usually very busy, you don't want to go straight to the principal. You want to handle things on your own and get through all those different steps of intervention until ultimately reaching the principal. This next question is, how do you communicate with parents? Now, this is probably going to be asked to you during your interview, and they want to see how you actually do communicate. So communication with parents is very, very important when you are a teacher. You want to make sure that the parent knows what's going on in your child's class, and you want to make sure that you have that communication with the parent. You want to tell them that you're always contacting parents to tell them not only bad things that are going on, but good things. You can say that you don't just call them when a bad thing happens or the student does something that maybe they weren't supposed to, but you call that parent just to let them know what's going on in class. You want to tell them if their grade changes even just a little bit. Now, if a student has a B and they drop down to a C, that's a big change. When you're a parent and you see that your B student gets a C or a C minus, that can really affect not only the student, but the parent as well. I like to have this relationship between the parent, the student, and myself so that it's a 3-way triangle. We can work together on any problems that may arise in the classroom. So if a student may be acting a little differently one day, I can talk to that student and I can talk to that other parent as well to see what's going on and how we can fix this problem. So I like to send out weekly emails or little updates to the parents. I usually have a little poster that I send digitally through email to the parents so that they know what's going on. Sometimes I also use different apps like Remind so that parents can know, all right, your student has homework tonight, please remind them. Or I can do that with the students. So there's no communication between the student to the teacher, it's just the teacher to the student. Just a reminder, you have homework due, or just a reminder, this project is due tomorrow, or things like that. So I like to keep that door open for communication. I do communicate with parents as much as I can, not only for bad things, but for great things. So if students get a really good grade on a test, I want them to know that so that they can be happy for their child too. One thing I like to do is make sure I email the student grades home to the parents and the students every single Friday. That keeps the parent in the loop on what their student is actually accomplishing in class and what their grade is. If a student is missing any work, the parent will immediately know how many pieces of homework that student has been missing that week. I do this every single week just to make sure everyone's updated on what's going on in the classroom and make sure that the grades are also being told to the parents. Sometimes you get students who will take that progress report or report card straight out of the mailbox so that the parent won't see it. Now, once I found that out, I decided I'm just going to digitally send their grades home. tell me about something that went wrong when you were teaching and what happened afterwards. So this one is kind of a tricky question because they're kind of asking you what are your weaknesses, and it's one of those questions where you don't want to actually tell them that you have all these weaknesses. You want to tell them how you get past that. So here, you're going to give an example about when something went wrong. Now, when I first went into my first interview ever, I actually wanted to use a real story that I learned from. So I went in and I told them about a specific incident that happened when I was student teaching. Now, when I was student teaching, I taught 7th and 8th graders. It was a lot of project-based learning, so students did do a lot of projects. Now, the first time we ever did a project with those students, I did not front-load information. I did not front-load rules. So front-load basically means you're telling them beforehand. So I was passing out scissors and glue, and of course, 7th graders are a little more rowdy than older students, and the 7th graders would grab the scissors and they'd pretend to like stab themselves. And the way you hear that sounds pretty bad, even though the way you see it maybe isn't that bad. So if I have my arm here and another student next to me just has a scissors and they're pretending to stab another student, just like, you know, playing around, it doesn't look that bad. But when you're actually saying that in an interview, it sounds really bad and it makes you look bad, as if you can't control your students and you can't control your class. Now, you don't want to say something that may get them thinking, you know, that's not something you want to hear, especially when you're a teacher. The most important thing about teaching is to make sure your students are safe. That is the absolute most important thing, is to make sure your students are safe. Now, when you have some kind of story like that, where you learned to front load information first, that's great. But when you start saying more details about, oh, students were pretending to stab each other, that's not what they want to hear, and that will make your whole interview go downhill. So you want to make sure that whatever story you're going to share isn't going to make you look bad at all. So one good example of a time when something went bad could be, well, when I was student teaching, we had a power outage and there was no power. It was really tough for me because we were focusing on all of our digital work. So we had a digital curriculum, and without power, we were unable to move forward. What I did instead was I had a couple of paper copies, traditional paper copies of lessons, and we focused on that instead to fill the time and make sure that they are still learning during that time, because time is really valuable when you're teaching. Another example you can say is that your school went on lockdown and you didn't know what to do. So that is something that maybe went wrong, but that's something that's completely out of your control. And when you do tell them stories about when something went wrong, preferably choose something where it's not in your control, something that is out of your control. And those are the better stories to tell, because when they're out of your control, they can't blame you for the power going out, or they can't blame you for the school going on lockdown. But what you can say is how you got through that. What did you do next? So you can say, well, during this lockdown, I made sure that students felt that they were safe, that they were okay. I made sure to lock my doors and close my blinds, and we continued learning. I didn't want students to get off task and freaking out about what was going on, so I continued my lesson, I calmed them down, and we continued to learn and take advantage of that valuable time we do have teaching. Although something may have happened outside, we were notified that something didn't happen very close to us, and it wasn't coming onto campus at all. We were assured that nothing was going to happen that was bad. They just wanted to make sure we were on lockdown. So I knew that this was going on, and I didn't want to waste time. I didn't want students to get off task, so we continued our lesson and we got through our lesson perfectly well. So those are the type of stories that you want to tell about something going wrong. Do not make any answer come back at you. So don't make it look bad. Think about something where you know it's going to be a good answer and it can't be turned around on you. Now this next question is, what frustrates you the most in the classroom? Or a similar question could be, if you could change something about teaching, what would you change? They aren't looking for you to bring politics into teaching or anything like that. They're looking at any type of struggles you have and how you kind of deal with those struggles. So for this one, we're going to be focusing on a different answer. So for something that frustrates you in teaching, or something that you wish you would change, you could say that maybe class periods are too short, and when you do your lessons, you wish that you had more time. This is where you want to say how important it is to take advantage of your time in the classroom. You really wish the periods were longer so that you could have more time to teach students so that your lessons can be a little bit longer and you can go even more in depth without spreading a lesson out throughout a week. You can spread it out through a couple of days, and you can really connect with students on a deeper level for these different lessons. You want to take that learning into a deeper level as opposed to just that surface learning. So this is where you want to make sure you say something about how you would change teaching or how you would change teaching at your specific school to help the students. Now, one of the most important questions you're going to be asked is how you differentiate work for your English language learners or your special needs students or even your gifted students. This is a very important question because not every student is the same, and they know that. And you're supposed to know that too. Now, you have to make sure that the work is not too hard for your English language learner. You got to make sure that your deaf student can learn that material as well, and even a blind student. What are you going to do when you have a student who can't hear while you're giving a lecture? You have to make sure that everything is there for them to succeed in your classroom. You can tell them how you differentiate all of the work for specific students, maybe English language learners or students with special needs. So you can use graphic organizers, you can use different sentence frames, you can change how you teach for specific students, and maybe some students don't have to do a warm-up because they don't have enough time to actually read this excerpt that you're going to show them. So one time when I was doing a lesson in my classroom, I was being observed by one of my BITSA mentors. So she told me that although all of the students had to do the warm-up and then get started on the reading to be able to contribute to our discussion, she told me that since these two kids are English language learners and maybe they read a little bit slower, the reading could take them a little longer. So by the time everyone else is ready to move on, they're still reading that excerpt. So what she told me is that you can actually get rid of the warm-up for these kids and you can move on to the warm-up for everyone else, but then tell these two kids that they can skip the warm-up and actually start reading. So they're going to start reading while everyone else is doing the warm-up. That kind of gives them a little bit of a head start. And they need that head start so that they can actually be able to participate in the discussion. So there's always a lot of different ways to differentiate in the classroom. And you want to make sure that you are actually telling them specific ways that you can do it instead of just telling them broad ways, like I can show visuals. For the most part, you're showing visuals anyways. So if you're telling them just that you're showing visuals, that's great, but you want to give more example of how you're doing things. So worksheets, are they graphic organizers? Are there pictures on these worksheets? Are things separated into boxes? Are there translations on those worksheets? Or what are you doing specifically? Are you pairing students differently, where maybe there's an English language learner and someone who is not an English language learner, but they speak the same language as the other student? You can pair them together, or you can even sit them together so that they can help each other. You can also do this with students with special needs. So you pair the higher achieving students with maybe the lower achieving students, or the ones that struggle a little more with the ones that maybe don't struggle very much at all. Pair them together so that when one finishes early, now their task is to help this other student, or maybe teach them. At the same time, it's still helping them, because by them teaching the other student, they're also learning the information a little bit more. They aren't wanting you to say, oh, it's the student's fault that they all failed. Obviously, if they all failed, or a majority of them failed, then it's more your problem. It's something that you did. So what you want to tell them is that you're going to reteach this lesson. They need to make sure that they understand the information before moving on, because if you move on and you're using that information that they had already learned and they didn't actually learn it, they're going to struggle. So you're going to tell them that you're going to reteach the lesson, and you can actually talk to your students to get them to help you. So when you're teaching and maybe not a lot of the kids do very well, you need to make sure that you're taking responsibility for that, especially in the interview. They want to see that you're taking responsibility for your kids' grades. And then they also want to see, what are you going to do next? So you had all of these kids fail this test. Now what are you going to do? Are you just going to reteach it, or are you going to teach it a different way? How are you going to reteach it in a different way if you do it in a different way? Whatever you do, you just want to make sure you don't tell them that you're just going to move on. Now, I've personally never been asked this question, but I know that some people have been. This question is, what are your interests outside of the classroom? You want to make sure you relate it to school. Now, if you say something that doesn't relate to school, it's not really helping them very much. Now, if you say you like cats, that's great, but that's not going to help you get this job. But if you say you really like playing a sport and you've coached that sport before, now this person knows, hey, maybe I can put you in that spot too. Maybe you can coach our football team, or maybe you can coach our softball team, or water polo, or or anything like that. Cheerleading. This is where you tell them things that you're really good at that can also benefit the school. Another thing you can do is talk to other teachers. If other teachers have that student in their classroom, you can see how that student behaves in the other teacher's classroom. Are they still misbehaving in that other classroom, or is it only your classroom? If that's the case, then maybe it's something that you're doing wrong. Look at yourself and see what you can fix. Maybe it's a student that they're seated next to. Maybe it's a student that they don't like, or maybe they're just in that class with a best friend. If they're in that class with a best friend, you can't sit them together, you need to move them. After you've called the parent to see what you can do, and the behavior still hasn't gotten better, you need to actually set up a parent meeting. So parent meetings are usually between you, the student, and the parent. Sometimes if you don't feel comfortable with just you, the parent, and the student, you can also get the counselor in on there. The counselor is going to be there to help back you up, just in case the parent and the student are against you. Sometimes schools also need teachers that can teach multiple classes or multiple subjects. Now, if they're looking for a speech teacher and an English teacher and a yearbook teacher, you can do all three. And you want to make sure that they know that you are the prime candidate because you have all of these interests and all of these experiences that can help you teach those classes as well. If you don't have any skills or experience coaching teams or leading anything, that's okay too. They're just asking about your interests and how it would relate to the school and this particular job opening. That leads us to our next question. It's what specific activities can you coach or advise? Now this one also ties into your interests. So you don't have to say things that you're interested in if they didn't ask you that. But things that you can coach and advise would be things that you actually have skills in. So maybe you've played soccer when you were young and you can coach soccer. Maybe you've never coached it before, but if you actually know how to play the game, then you can probably actually be a coach and help these kids too. If you can do anything digitally, you might be a good candidate for a yearbook teacher. Or if you're interested in acting, you can be a theater teacher. If you have an interest in any type of clubs, you can also be a club advisor. There are a lot of different clubs available on school campuses, depending where you're at, but most comprehension high schools have a large variety of clubs available. Do you know any instruments? Because maybe you can teach some of the kids instruments in a club after school. We at my school have a teacher who's really good at guitar, so she teaches kids during our advisement period how to play guitar, and that's so cool. So maybe you would be able to be an advisor for a club as well. Are you artistic? Are you into any type of digital technology that has to do with art? Because maybe you'd be a great candidate for a yearbook teacher. Are you interested in acting? Have you taken acting classes before? Because maybe you can be the drama teacher or even the whole theater chair. Maybe you can be the one who puts on productions for the whole school. They want to know what you're able to do and what interests you outside of that specific subject that you're teaching. Now this next question is, describe your teaching style. So for this question, you want to make sure that you actually tell them what you're doing when you're teaching. You want to make sure that you tell them you use technology in the classroom because this is 21st century learning, so kids are supposed to be using technology in the classroom. So you want to tell them that you focus a lot on collaboration, technology usage, and making class fun. You want to make sure that they know that you know all of the 21st century learning skills and that you implement those skills in your own classroom and your own lessons. So if you say that you use technology in the classroom, maybe they're going to ask you how you use it. Or if you make class fun, they're going to ask you, well, how do you make class fun? They don't want to hear that you just make class fun because that could be a bad thing if kids aren't actually learning. So maybe you should tell them that you make learning fun. Tell them that it's important for you to create lifelong learners in your own classroom. So although you're a lifelong learner yourself, you want to make sure that your students become lifelong learners as well. And you want them to enjoy learning. So that's how you make it fun. Sometimes you hear about the fun teachers, and those aren't usually the teachers that actually teach their kids. Maybe they're probably their favorite teacher, but that doesn't mean they're actually learning. The next question is, tell me about your teaching strategy. Now, there's a lot of strategies that you use when you're student teaching that maybe you don't even know you're using. So the first strategy you can say you use is the lecture method. Now, lectures aren't very exciting for the students, to be honest, and it's probably not what they want to hear. So since we're focusing on 21st century learning, Lectures can be used, but you want to add a little more to that. So you're going to focus on discussions, on giant class discussion. You want to make sure that the students are able to collaborate with each other as well. So there's different methods to do that. One of them is called think, pair, share. So the student's first going to think about their answer, and then they're going to share with a partner. After that, then they're going to share with the class. That means they're prepared enough to answer the question to the class, and they have a chance to talk to other students to see what answers they got as well. One important method that I was taught when I was student teaching is the I do, we do, you do. So this is basically where the teacher is going to do a skill. They're going to perform some kind of task, and then we're going to do it as a class. So I already did it, now we're going to do it together as a class. After that, you're going to do it yourself. So I did it, we did it together, now you show me. With that said, you can also say you do a lot of class discussions. Having giant class discussions is really important to make sure that the class understands as a whole, and you can also call out specific students if they have any ideas that they want to share. In addition, you can also say that you use technology for videos. Videos are becoming really popular, and YouTube itself is now considered the second largest search engine in the world. So since YouTube is used for its videos, it's really important to show them that you utilize this tool. Another thing you can say is that you do a lot of brainstorming. One thing that I was taught is to use thinking maps. There's specific trainings on thinking maps, and you can actually Google them yourself. But thinking maps are very important because there's actually graphic organizers that are just given to you. So it's an easy way for students to organize their thoughts and put it into a graphic organizer in those thinking maps. You can do them together as a class, you can do them in groups, or you can have students do them individually depending on what they're working on. Another strategy you can say that you use is Socratic seminars. Now I know that it's a little different for each subject, but since I teach English, we have Socratic seminars every now and then. So it's basically where kids get into circles and we actually have this Socratic seminar and talk about what we're doing, and talk about what we think, and talk about what we feel about what we're doing. So it's more like if you're reading a book or if you're going over some kind of article. We're going to add our own opinions and our own thoughts and ideas, and we're going to get a little deeper into that conversation and into that whole discussion. So it's not as shallow as a whole class discussion, it gets a little deeper. The next question you may be asked is, if I were to walk into your classroom, what would I see and what would it look like? It's going to be bright and colorful, as you already know my classroom is. So I tell them that I have rainbow streamers all around the bottoms of my classroom walls. I tell them that I have pictures and posters that help them with their learning. I put a lot of posters in my classroom that focus on grammar tips and writing tips, anything that would help them out with any of the lessons that we're working on, or any of the projects or papers that we're working on, or just any type of posters that relate to what we're learning in our class, or any type of motivational posters as well. There's a lot of different posters that have quotes on them, and you can take those quotes and use them in your classroom if they tend to be motivational quotes or anything that would relate to what you're teaching. I would also tell them that I prefer tables instead of desks, or if I do have desks, I put all of the desks in little groups. So this tells them that I'm working on collaboration in my classroom as well. One of the most important things you want to tell them in this question is that you do keep the objective and the standard on the board. The reason you want to tell them this is because there may be some people that walk into your classroom and they don't know what's going on. Maybe they just want to observe, like a parent wants to observe, or a principal or a vice principal just wants to come in and see what's going on. It's a whole lot easier for them to understand what's going on if they could just look at the board and see what you're doing. So make sure you tell them that you put the standard and the objective up on your whiteboard every single morning before class starts. Another thing that they like to hear is that you display student work. Now it's really important in high school and junior high school, sometimes even elementary school, to display student work. They usually work really hard on their work and they want it to be displayed so that they can get that recognition. If students do really well, I do put student work up on my board. If you've seen my video about my classroom from last year, most of my decorations were actually of student work. It was really fun for me to assign different projects that would make my classroom look really exciting and fun. So there were a lot of coloring activities, comic books that we made, and just really fun activities that we did. If you're able to show that work on your walls, it's not only great for the students to feel better about themselves and more motivated to continue to get their work on the wall, it's great for anyone who does walk into your classroom because they can see what you've been doing all year. Another question you may get asked is, what is your greatest success in teaching so far? So if you haven't been teaching very long, you can tell a story about when you did your student teaching. Now for me, I have a few stories that I usually share about specific students that I have in my classroom and how my teaching has affected their lives. So I like to tell those personal stories. Stories can be different for each teacher, I'm sure that they are, but there's a lot of stories that can also be the same. You can tell them just how much your teaching meant to a student or something that they may have said, but what you want to focus on is the actual accomplishments that you can see. If a student has been continuously failing a lot of their assignments in your classroom and no one else has, you can actually tell them that the student did better if they did do better. You can tell them how you've worked with specific students who were really struggling and then they ended up doing really well and maybe passing with an A. You can tell them any type of story like that, but again, all the stories are going to be different for each teacher and each person. Something else you may get asked is how you motivate students. So I personally work at a continuation school and it's really hard to get students motivated. So if you are interviewing for a school where there's not a lot of student motivation, they may ask you, how do you motivate a student? For me, I don't allow students to put their heads down at all. I make sure I'm always in proximity with the student if they're ever off task so that they understand, all right, you need to get back to work. I make sure that my lessons are fun and engaging for them because they need to enjoy what they're learning. If they aren't enjoying what they're learning, they're going to check out and not be interested. Definitely tell them that engagement is so important to you that you do whatever you can to make sure your lessons are engaging for not just specific students, but for all of them. That includes differentiation. The next question says, tell me about your professional development experience. So here's where you're going to list out all of the different professional development events or meetings that you may have gone to. If you haven't been to any of them, then you can always tell them that you have all these different professional development meetings at your own school. You can also tell them about the collaboration time you use with your other teachers and staff at the school. Usually collaboration time is spent with your own department, but sometimes other schools can mix departments. So when I was student teaching, my English department mixed with my history department. So we kind of worked together in our collaboration time. We learned about a lot of different things and we were trained on different skills as well. And now you would want to tell them what those different things are and what those different skills are. So here at this school right now, we have collaboration time every Wednesday. So the students get out early, they have a minimum day, and we're here for collaboration until the end of the day. During that time, we're collaborating with different departments and we're collaborating within our own department as well. Sometimes we have TOSAs that will come on campus and teach us different things, different apps and technology things on our laptops. They can show us different teaching strategies and teach us different skills to use in our classroom as well. When I was student teaching, I was also sent on a professional development meeting along with the other teachers at the school. That's where I learned about graphic organizers and thinking maps. They love to hear about thinking maps and organizing thoughts through graphic organizers. So if you've been on any trainings like that, you can definitely tell them those as well. In addition, if you've been to any of your technology trainings at all, they definitely want to hear about those. Or if you even have any specific trainings from different subjects. Like for me, I teach drama, I teach English 9, English 10, I've taught English as a second language before, and I've also taught English 11. So with all of these different subjects that I've taught, there's a lot of different trainings that come with them. Next year I may be teaching yearbook and ASB, so there's a lot of different trainings that will come along with those as well. And those trainings are usually offered by the district. You can sign up for free depending on your district, and you can just go to these trainings and learn about them. I've also been to different curriculum trainings before. We are adopting a new textbook at my district now, so I went and I actually was working on the pilot for that textbook. So they want to hear all this different stuff. If you've been on a pilot committee before, or if you've done any of that, they definitely want to know, because that means that you're more up to learning and finding out more skills for yourself to better your students' learning. Now, most of the time when they're asking about collaboration, they're asking about the collaboration that goes on in your classroom. But one of the interviews I went on was actually asking about how I collaborate. Now, at that time, I had only student taught, and it was one of my first interviews, so I didn't really understand what they meant by that. I was thinking more how I collaborate with my students, but what they were asking was, how do I collaborate with other teachers or other staff? Now, with that, you can take different answers. You can say that you collaborate through your own department, or you collaborate with other departments in your campus as well. You can also tell them that you've collaborated with TOSAs and counselors and principals and vice principals before. You can say that you have an induction mentor if you're going through induction and you collaborate with them on a daily basis. But they want to know how you're collaborating. So I collaborate with a lot of the different teachers on my campus, specifically in my own department. Since I teach English, I like to see what the other English teachers are teaching. So I go over to their classroom and I see what they're doing. I ask them any of the lessons that they've taught and how they've worked in their classroom. If there's something that I like, I may take it and use it for the next year. Especially if you have any teachers that are teaching the same subject as you, it's a really beneficial thing to collaborate with other teachers. If you're a new teacher, you can talk to the older teachers because chances are they aren't making any of their lessons. They made them when they were a new teacher. So all the time that you're spending making lessons, they already have done. So it's easy to go to the other teachers and just ask them for any of the lessons that they've taught that have worked well that maybe you can borrow and use in your own classroom. You can also say how you collaborate with other departments. So since my department when I was student teaching was with our history department, we had English and history together. That means when history was teaching about World War II, I, as the English teacher, can teach the Anne Frank diary, or any of the lessons that may correlate a little closer would help the students learn the material a whole lot faster and be able to make those connections. Now, when you go into an interview, you want to make sure that you're actually prepared for any type of question that they may throw at you. Now, this question I haven't actually been prepared for when I did get asked it. I was only asked this question twice, but both times I was kind of stuck. I didn't know what to say. So the question is, tell me about a lesson you taught that worked out really well. Now, for me, when I'm teaching, if something's not working well, I just fix it immediately, or I change to something else, or I kind of just tweak it a bit. Now, when I'm asked the question about a lesson that worked really well, I'm not actually thinking about all of my lessons because there's so many lessons that we teach. So you want to make sure you have in mind a lesson that you actually taught that worked really well and didn't have any problems. You want to focus on the different parts of that lesson that worked really well and how that benefited both you and your students. So one of the lessons that I use is a lesson that I actually taught when I was student teaching. I never taught this any other time aside from student teaching because of the age group of kids that I teach, but the lesson that I do teach has to do with making a sandwich. Now, I know that sounds kind of crazy, but what you're focusing on is getting the kids to follow directions and be able to write directions. So they can't skip any steps. So what I did is I brought in all these different materials to make a sandwich and I brought them to school. I put them up on my desk and I would ask students, I'm going to make a sandwich, but I need your help. Now they would tell me exactly step by step what I was supposed to do. So if I had the bread in its bag over here and I had the peanut butter jar over here and they tell me, oh, well, you got to put the peanut butter on the bread. So I would take the whole jar of peanut butter and I'd put it on top of the loaf of bread. And I was like, is this how you do it? It doesn't look right. So they would have to tell me, all right, let's go back. What do we do first? So they're obviously going to forget to tell you, open the bag of bread and take off the lid for the jar of peanut butter. They're not going to remember that when you first start asking them, but they will learn as you start to do some crazy things that they tell you to. So that's something that worked out really well for me because not only did it get students really interested in what we were learning, but it made sure that they were having fun. Kids were laughing and enjoying what they were doing, and they were learning in the process as well. How do you use technology in the classroom? So for me, I've always had some sort of technology available to me when I was teaching. When I was student teaching, each student had their own iPad. So it was given to them by the school and they would kind of check it out like a library book, and they would have that iPad for the entire year. So students always had technology with them. They were supposed to bring it to school every single day, and then they would take it home to do their homework if they did have any homework. So for me, I've always had technology. If you haven't had technology that you've worked with in the classroom, you can tell what it would be like if you did. So although my first year of student teaching, we did have iPads available for the students, my second year, we didn't have iPads. My second year was last year, and that's when we had Chromebooks available. There was a class set of Chromebooks in my classroom, and that's what it is this year too at this school. So every single year, I have had this technology available. So you want to tell them how you would use technology in your classroom. So you can mention iPads or Chromebooks or different other types of tablets and laptops. It doesn't really matter. If you have a class class set that's really beneficial to you and your students, and you want to make sure that you're telling them how it's going to be beneficial for the students mostly. Some different websites and apps you can say that you use would be Google Classroom. If you have any experience with Google Classroom, it's actually pretty easy, and they would love to hear that you have that experience. Some schools actually focus on Schoology, so if you have any experience using Schoology, that would help you out as well. Now, each school has their own program that they use for grading and that whole teacher platform. Now, here at my school, we use Aries. At my other school, when I was student teaching, we actually used PowerSchool. So I have experience with both of those platforms, and that's what they would love to hear, is that if you already know how to use that, then that means that's less training that they have to pay for and that they have to actually conduct. So you can tell them that you use different web quests and apps that help them learn. So web quests are basically little game type of things where kids do a lot of research to answer questions online. You can also say that there's games like Kahoot and quizzes where kids can actually do test prep and online quizzes digitally, so they can actually learn quicker and have more fun. The reason they'll learn quicker is because they're going to get what's called instant feedback. So when you have digital apps and digital websites where kids are answering questions, they're going to tell them immediately whether that is right or wrong. Now, when they get that digital feedback instantly, it helps them understand, okay, I got that wrong, I need to try again, or whatever the situation. So they're getting that instant feedback to help them, and it helps you as well to see instant feedback from the entire class. Okay, what is this data that we're getting? You can take that data, analyze it, and use that for your next lesson. Maybe you need to reteach a lesson, maybe you need to go over something again for specific students, or maybe for the whole class. So you want to make sure that you're telling them that that instant feedback helps you as a teacher to know what you may improve on, and it helps students know what they need to improve on as well. And here's where you can also tell them how these different apps and websites can help make learning fun for them. For me, I've specifically done a case study that has focused on gamification and game-based learning in the classroom, so the use of things like Kahoot. We used ABC Mouse when I taught English as a second language. We used all these different apps and games that have helped motivate students to actually want to try harder and learn more. So you can say something like that. If you haven't done a case study on that, that's perfectly fine. There's a lot of actual research that proves that gamification and game-based learning through different apps with technology will improve student motivation in the classroom. In addition, you want to tell them different things that would kind of relate to differentiation. So differentiation is a lot easier when you have technology available. You can use a lot of images, you can use a lot of graphic organizers that are all digital to help you and your students navigate that differentiation. Now that's all the interview questions I have for you today. If there's any other questions that you're curious of how to answer, please write them in the comments below and I'll definitely get some answers for you. I've had quite a few experiences my own with interviewing for teaching positions, and although each subject can have a few different questions, for the most part they're all pretty much the same. So if you liked this video or it helped you out at all, please make sure you give this video a thumbs up. It really helps me out as a new YouTuber. Please make sure you subscribe if you haven't subscribed already, and if there's any other type of videos you're interested in, please let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you next time. Bye!
Give me a reason to get out of bed.